Hi, folks. Welcome to your Read Aloud for CR3 Native Americans of New York State. Just as a reminder, we have some smart words that have been underlined in the reading. You should take your smart words check either after you read this through one time on your own or after we finish the highlighting. So let's start with the highlighting. We have, looks like 13 questions. Let's zoom in a little bit. And we're going to take these questions one by one. We're going to start by looking for where did the Native Americans of New York State settle 5,000 years ago? And I always like to read two questions ahead. Why did they choose these sites to settle in? All right, let's zoom in. And here we go. 5,000 years ago, Native Americans moved into various parts of New York State. These people were hunters and gatherers and only partly dependent on farming. They settled along the waterways, the Finger Lakes, Lake Champlain, and Lake George, as well as the Mohawk, Hudson, Susquehanna, and Genesee rivers. They also clustered in coastal areas such as Long Island and Manhattan. These sites assured the Native Americans game, fish, and good water transportation. So, double checking our questions, I think that we found the answer to both question one and question two. Where did these Native Americans settle and why did they choose to settle there? So, we're going to grab our highlighter, we're going to make sure that it is semi-transparent. We're going to use yellow, and I see that they settle along the waterways. And I'm going to highlight the examples of these waterways. These might be lakes and or rivers. And you could even you could highlight clustered in coastal areas. All right. And we're going to number that number one. Go back to our drawing tool. And I also saw the reason why they settled there was it assured the Native Americans game, fish, and good water transportation. So these sites assured game, fish, and good water transportation. So number that number two. And we're ready to read the next paragraph and hopefully answer a couple more questions. Let's mark our questions here. Drawing tool. Question one is done. Question two is done. We're ready for what were the names of the two main groups living in New York in the late 1400s, and possibly what did these Native Americans rely on for most of their food supply? The two main groups living in New York in the late 1400s were the Algonquins and the Iroquois. Both groups had great respect for their environment. According to an ancient Iroquois myth, the Great Spirit blessed the land by placing his hand on it. An imprint of his hand created the Finger Lakes. Okay, and it looks like we have the answer here to question three. The two groups living in New York State were the Algonquin and the Iroquois. But I have not found the question number four yet. Question four, what did these Native Americans rely on for most of their food supply? Let's keep reading. Food is the subtitle here. By the late 1400s, the Algonquins and Iroquois had increased their knowledge of farming to the point where they could rely on crops such as corn for most of their food supply. I think I'm going to stop right there since the answer was so obvious. And I'm just going to highlight they could rely on crops such as corn for most of their food supply. So not the whole sentence, just that one chunk. That's question four. Move that into place. I guess I'll finish this paragraph and then or maybe we should peek at the question here and see what we're looking for next. What other uses did these farmers have for corn plants besides food? Okay, so we'll finish that paragraph. But hunting animals and gathering wild fruits and berries remained important. Where the soil was less fertile or the growing season short, as in northern New York, people relied more on hunting and fishing than on farming. Corn or maize was the basic food of both the Algonquins and the Iroquois. Corn was part of every meal. Ground into flour, it was made into mush or dumplings. Boiled or baked corn was combined with meat, beans or berries. Hunters often packed a healthful snack of dried food and maple sugar. All right, so they ate a lot of corn, but I think the question was asking, what else did they use the corn plant for besides food? So we need to keep reading. We didn't highlight anything in that paragraph. That's okay. Farmers made good use of all parts of the corn plants. They wove husks into moccasins, baskets, mats, carrying straps, and masks worn during religious ceremonies. Dried kernels were strung as beads. Corn silk was a basic ingredient in medicines, and strong leaves made good compresses or bandages. Smoke from burning corn cobs was used to dry and preserve animal hides. It is no surprise that the corn plant was a recurring symbol in Iroquois and Algonquin art and decoration. All right, so let's blast through this. We got a lot to highlight. Good compresses, bandages, beads, moccasins, mats, carrying straps, masks to preserve animal hides. These are all examples of the corn being used for something other than food. So it looks like we got that covered. Question 5 is done. Let's take a peek at question 6. Besides corn, what other types of food did these Native Americans eat? We're going to highlight 3 or 4 examples of other food besides corn. After corn, the major farm crops were beans, squash, pumpkins, and tomatoes. I feel like I should have my highlighter right in my hand. Maybe I should be highlighting as I read. Sunflowers were grown for their nutritious seeds. In season, women and girls searched the woods for berries, nuts, fruits, and edible roots. They also tapped maple trees and processed the sap into syrup and sugar. Okay, so maple syrup. I love that stuff on pancakes. All right, text box. And that is question 6, I believe. Let me check my list here. Yep, we're now going to move on to question 7. Highlight some of the jobs that women had. And I just know from past years, this usually gets a little tricky for students. So I am so glad that you checked in with me today. Oh, but wait, I think we got more for question 7 or question 6. Deer was the main source of meat for New York's Native Americans. Other game included bears, rabbits, squirrels, birds, snakes, frogs, yuck, and skunks. I hope they weren't eating skunks, but it sounds like they were. Since Native Americans usually settled near lakes, streams, and rivers, fish was an abundant food. Coastal Indians took clams, oysters, and shrimp from the sea. So this all works for number 6. Maybe I should move 6 sort of in the middle here so I can see that these are all examples for question 6. But now we're going to be looking for what kind of jobs women had to answer question 7. Division of labor. Labor means work. The Iroquois and Algonquins devoted most of their time and energy to providing food, clothing, and shelter for family and clan. Food had to be grown, hunted, or caught, and then prepared for immediate use or preserved for the future. Indians made all of their clothing, tools, and weapons by hand. Work was divided between men and women, each group having a counterpart in the work of the other. The men, for example, cut down trees and cleared fields so that the women could farm. Women cooked food and made clothing from animals that the men brought back from a hunt. Well, I already see some examples of the work that women did. Women could farm. Sounds like they were farmers. Women cooked the food. They made the clothing. Now, just peeking ahead here, question 8 is going to ask some of the jobs that the men had, but I'm going to hold off on highlighting that. I'm just going to focus on women for now. Continuing, women produced all the clothing for themselves and their families. First, they converted raw animal skins into leather. This process, called tanning, began with cleaning and soaking the skin. Plant or animal acids were then applied as drying agents. Finally, the skins were oiled and rubbed to a smooth and soft texture. we're getting a lesson in leather making here. Only then could the women sew, cut, and decorate new garments. They shredded pieces of tanned leather into thongs and lacings and used them for sewing. For finer thread, they dried and twined plant fibers. The actual sewing was done with bone needles. Other tasks included weaving corn husks for moccasins and braiding rabbit skins into rope. So notice I really didn't highlight anything in the middle here because this is all an explanation of how they produce clothing. So rather than just highlight the whole paragraph, I just highlighted they produced the clothing. They made moccasins, which is shoes, and made rope, and they farmed, and they cooked the food. So let's grab our text box. And all of this helps answer question 7. So I can put my 7 here. I can duplicate it. I can put another 7 down here. Some people like to double label. If the answer in the text, if it appears in a different place in the text, like more than once, you can always label it twice. So that takes care of question 7. Question 8 is highlight some of the jobs that men had. We're going to continue on to the back page because I know there's a lot here on men. In fact, the next subheading is men. Men. Indian women were warriors, craftsmen, and hunters. As a warrior, a man had a duty to protect his family and clan from enemies. As a craftsman, he made his own weapons, as well as farm implements and household tools. Hunting was a major responsibility. A skilled hunter knew the habits of animals and could read the forest for signs of an animal's presence or movement. He was able to track silently through the brush and to avoid detection by his prey. Indian craftsmen were skilled in working with stone, wood, and bone. They sized, shaped, sharpened, and polished the raw material into a finished weapon, tool, or utensil. War and hunting weapons, such as arrowheads and spear points, were made by chipping stones into triangular points and strapping them to wooden shafts. By scraping hard bone into sharp points, a craftsman made needles and other pointed tools. All right, so there's a lot here. All right, I think the first line here sums it up. They were warriors, they're craftsmen, they're hunters. I'm gonna double check the question, highlight some of the jobs that men had. I think I got that covered. So I'm going to label all of this question 8. And I'm going to peek at the next question. What was the process for making a dugout canoe? And also, how did the Iroquois protect their villages from attack? Next paragraph. Making a canoe. Making a dugout canoe was a difficult process. First, a tree was felled by burning it at the base. Then a small area in the middle of the trunk was burned by hot coals. Using a chisel-like tool of stone or bone, the canoe maker chipped away the charred wood and enlarged the hollow by repeated burning and chipping. The canoe was finished by smoothing the hollow with a sanding stone or shell. So this whole paragraph is, again, piquing our question. What was the process for making a dugout canoe? It's all right here. This is one of those rare examples where I would say you could highlight the entire paragraph. We try to not highlight that much at once, but in this case, I think that's your best choice. So we're going to label that question 9. And I didn't see anything about villages yet. So we will be looking for how did the Iroquois protect their villages from attack? And why did they move their villages every 10 or 20 years? And the next subheading is called the Iroquois Village. Like the Algonquins, the Iroquois built their villages on high ground, preferably near the fork of 2 streams. High ground was a natural defense against enemy attack. For added safety, the villagers surrounded their settlement with a stockade of logs or saplings. A stockade is a fence. So that's one example of how they protected their villages, and also building their village on high ground. They mentioned it's at the fork of two streams, so that provides them some protection as well. And so there's your answer to question 10. Some Iroquois villages contained only a few hundred people. Others were several thousand strong. Large villages used up the surrounding natural resources within 10 or 20 years. At that time, the villagers moved to a new site. So there's our answer. That's why they moved their villages every 20 years. It's because they used up the surrounding natural resources. You can imagine that a village with several thousand people would use up a lot of stuff, be it trees, probably overhunted the deer and the animals. And so eventually they had to move on to a new location. And that is question 11. So we did 10, we did 11. We're now looking for what were their homes called and who were the members of the Fireside family. Okay, we're in the home stretch. We're almost done. Inside the village walls, the bark-covered lawn houses, and I just know from experience as a social studies teacher, this is what they called their houses, were about 20 feet wide and up to 120 feet long. Within each entry was a storage area piled high with firewood and food supplies. Next came a hallway down the center of the building with bowl-shaped fire pits placed at equal distances throughout. Openings in the roof let the smoke escape. Along both sides of the hallway, individual rooms provided quarters where a fireside family, mother, father, and children, could eat, work, and sleep. Bark storage closets separated a fireside family from its neighbors on either side. The two families, facing each other across the hallway, shared a fire pit. So there I have my answer. A fireside family is the mother, the father, and the children. And I can mark that. I believe that's question 12 for lawn houses. Whoops, looked like I changed the color on that. Change that back. See how I can do that. I want that to be red. And I'm going to add another text box here for question 13, which is our last question, but we're going to keep reading because we only have another paragraph and the reading's not quite over yet. A wide shelf, a foot or two above ground, ran along the inside wall of each room. Cushioned with furs, mats, and skins, it made a comfortable bed or seat. The occupants stored pots, kettles, tools, and weapons around the room and under the shelf. Dried food hung on nearby walls and rafters. Infants were kept safe in cradle boards. These deerskin pouches, fixed in wooden frames, were hung on a post or worn as backpacks by women as they worked. And here's a picture of a lawn house. We'll be looking at more pictures of lawn houses when we get a little deeper into this unit and we take a closer look at the Iroquois Indians. So that completes your reading. Your highlighting is now complete. Make sure that you are also completing your smart words check with the underlined words. And then the next step will be to complete your notes in your unit packet and the note check. Thanks for watching.